Hi guys, welcome back to the channel. I'm Maria and today I will be giving you the lowdown on how to revise for history A-level. So I did my A-levels back in 2019, so I was actually part of the last cohort to sit them, and I got an A star in my A-level history as well as my history GCSE. So today what I wanted to talk about is how to approach history. History is a mammoth subject. It can feel really overwhelming at times, and so I think it's really important to face it strategically. So today I'm structuring the video in a few sections. The first one is just a quick overview of history A-level. The next section is dealing with the overwhelming course structure. So of course you're going to have textbooks and online resources and whatever, and it's kind of how to make sense of all that and make revision feel a lot less daunting. From there, I think the next really important thing to target is the dates and the facts, because history is full of them, and for any argument you're making, you need to make use of them. With the GCSE, because the facts are directly asked in some cases, you will need to know them and state them, whereas in A-level, since it's just essay-based, you will need to be able to remember them but judiciously use them in your essays. And then from there, I think it's really important to take an analytical approach to how you're looking at all the data, and I'll go into analysing it and taking a more critical eye in examining the history course. And then the other really important aspect to history in all of the papers is the sources. You'll always be asked about sources, and I wanted to talk about that specifically because I think these can be easy marks to get, and you need to make sure you get them, guys. They can feel quite scary, especially when you're faced with some odd looking cartoon, but trust me guys, you've got this, and I will discuss that as well. And then my final section in the video will be essays, because with the history exam, it is essentially just essay based. You have to get good at writing them, and I reckon it's by getting a lot of practice in. And I'll talk you through how I approach the essays and how potentially you could too. Without any further ado, let's get started. Yes, I know there is a completely different background, and that's because I lost the footage, which honestly crushed my soul. Anyway, so what I first wanted to say is it's really overwhelming. You have to find a way to condense the information in a way that suits you. What I personally did is I made these cheat sheets. So for the history A-level, we had 24 chapters for each side of the course. So that was 48. 48 chapters sounds like a lot, and trust me, it is. So what I did is I made a cheat sheet which was super colourful, super condensed, and I just genuinely really liked looking at. I did one of those for every single chapter in the course, and what I would do is I'd then go over it in kind of a spaced repetition sort of way. So here are two examples of my cheat sheets for the Germany side of the course. As you can see, they were super condensed and really colourful, so they were quite easy to work with. They would tend to be one side, sometimes two, for a really lengthy chapter. With the cheat sheets, I think it's really important to go over them regularly. So what I would do is I would make one a day over the Easter holiday, and then from there I would just review them quite often. So let's say I started with the first cheat sheet. I made it on Monday. I would then look at it on Tuesday as well, and if I was feeling relatively comfortable with it, I would then review that on Thursday, and I would just increase the gap between reviews every time, because one, you'd already remember it the more you've gone over it and reinforced it, but also I think it was good because each time you did a review, it was faster because you knew most of it, and I would test myself while reviewing it. So I'd make myself kind of recite certain bits or make sure I remember certain dates and that sort of thing. And I thought that was really helpful. Obviously, it might be different for you, but that is the system I used and I found it really helpful. Number two, the dates and the facts. So yeah, you have to do them, you have to learn them, and that's challenging, it's annoying, and those dates are confusing. But the thing is, they're really important because they help you establish a timeline in your head. So the first thing I think is really important is having them in your cheat sheet, if you have one of those, but then also having flashcards. I really liked using Quizlet, but I know other people like just making them by hand or using things like Anki. The whole point though is you're looking at them regularly, you're testing yourself actively, and then the ones that you're struggling with, you then go over more often until you actually learn them. Super important. I think another way you can like reinforce this is by making timelines. So what I had done is I'd made sticky notes and I would just put them on my wall, and so I could kind of see it in quite a visual way, and that really reinforced my learning. I think it's super important, especially for periods like the Cuban Missile Crisis, where a lot happens over the space of a few days and you have to kind of see how things come together. So number 3, the sources. The sources can be pretty scary. The thing is, I think they become a lot less scary the more you practice them. So what I suggest doing, and this is something I did for my younger sibling, is I just went through all of the past paper questions and I found all of the sources that they'd asked about. You can collate them into a massive Word document and form a booklet. What you do is you then go through maybe 1 or 2 of these every day, maybe in the evening, and just annotate it. Set yourself a timer, maybe just 5 minutes, because that's realistically how much time you'll have for planning in the exam anyway. I found that super useful, and it meant that when I actually saw the sources, 1, they weren't so scary anymore, but 2, I was in a position where I could analyze them very quickly and come up with a cohesive argument at the end of it. This is what it looked like. So it's just a whole bunch of sources which have been collated together, and there's a huge range of those, just to give you an idea of the breadth of questions they can ask. Another really key skill in history is analysing and making a critical judgment. And I think this really comes from considering like how things were better or worse and how things changed over time. A good way of like approaching this, at least I found, was you could make a timeline and then on the y-axis you could have another parameter. So it could be something like control, or it could be satisfaction of the society or wealth, and you can plot things over time. So for example, if you were considering the Cuban Missile Crisis, you could really track that escalation in fear and risk of, nuclear war. So I found that really useful, and it's just a way of getting your brain to think about things in a slightly different way. You can also annotate your notes in a certain way, which really makes it clear what the pros and cons of a certain piece of legislation were. Get a green and a red pen, and that's really useful. It then makes writing essays a lot easier because you've actually done this whole process of analysis already. So you've already had some sort of practice in looking at things critically. So my biggest piece of advice for the history A-level is essay practice. Yes, I know the thought of writing loads of essays is really daunting, so don't. Yes, you've heard me right, don't write a billion essays. What I would suggest you do is actually to do a whole bunch of essay plans. I think during my A-levels, I had actually planned out around 100 essays for history. And that was really useful because by the time I got to the exam, I had planned out every single essay that came up on the paper. Yes, every single essay. I had planned a certain variant of that. And so when you see the exam question, you're like, wow, well, I know how to approach this. And it was fine. So with an essay plan, you just have the question at the top, you structure it in terms of your paragraphs, and you just bullet point it. You might have an introductory sentence and an overall judgment for your conclusion, but you can just bullet point the certain facts you want to have in there, and just having a clear structure in your head makes it a lot less daunting in the exam. but also means you're more likely to have a well-structured and well-argued essay that you're handing in. So I think the main drive should be on practicing essay plans. I think they're also a lot more useful than doing the full essay, because realistically you won't remember the essay when it comes to the exam, and that might even be more stressful because you're trying to remember all these difficult concepts in your head and how you've written them, and if you've written them in a nice way you might be trying to remember how you phrased things. So I'd say the essay plan, getting the skeleton framework in and really having that down is the most useful thing. In addition to that though, I'd say there is some benefit to having practiced essay writing in like a mock setup. So maybe your school does mocks, maybe they don't. If they don't, make sure you've done a full paper where you write the 2 or 3 essays that you'll need for the exam period in one go. It's really important to be as strict with yourself as possible so you're mimicking the exam scenario as close as you can. I think this can really highlight to you if there are problems with your timing, but also for getting your nerves under control, because writing essays in exam conditions is really scary, and if you've had practice with it, you'll feel a lot calmer on the day. So there you have it. Those are my main strategies for approaching the history A-level. History is difficult. I honestly wish you guys all the best with revising for the history A-level or GCSE or whatever else you're doing. You guys have got this. Just be strategic, prioritize things, and remember there are just many different aspects you need to cover with your revision. The last piece of advice I have though is please write something. So I think the most dangerous thing in history or any essay subject is to get so flustered that you decide not to write anything. If you don't write anything, you will not get any marks. So think about it. If you write something, you will get marks. Once you've planned your essay, make a start, because you can only get marks for things that you have down or the examiner can at least see. If it's not on the page, they won't know it was in your head. So yeah, please write something down. You will get some marks for it. And the other thing is, please roughly plan before you start writing anything. Just have a short bullet point list or a mind map. It takes 5 minutes. It is definitely worth the time, because it means that your overall argument is going to be better structured, and it kind of avoids the risk of you getting, 3/4 of the essay through and being like, oh God, I forgot this really important point, and then doing all these arrows and crossing bits out. Trust me, that's not a place you want to be. So if you can avoid that, please do.